Dr. Jazz.
But yeah, man, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
I started doing these interviews, and of course, kind of your name every now and then pops up with the people who you played with. So I was like, okay, you must have an interesting story being an Irish, going to New York and now to Berlin. So I was like, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. So, but I don't know. I just wanted to start with you being a band leader, and the last what I heard, Obsany, your latest group, and the tunes sound amazing. And like, is there an album being in the progress, or what's the story there? I mean,
there is, yeah. Oh man, thanks. There's there's those videos that we put up last whenever that was, last autumn. And there's some stuff that we recorded with Peter L at his studio that he's kind of remixing. But there is plans. We just booked 2 days in a studio in Berlin in February.
Yeah.
So I'm frantically trying to write some new music for that. And I'm a very slow writer, so I'm hoping I can get a bunch of tunes ready in time. And then we have 2 days there. So and it's a nice studio. It's that place Hansa. So I'm excited to do that. And we'll do a gig before it, like rehearse a little bit, play a gig. Do 2 days in the studio.
How do you write now these days? How do you start? What do you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't really have a system, but I'm interested in finding some.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking always, like other composers, like how do you do it? And
yeah, man, I mean, there's a few things I've done. I mean, sometimes it's just the obvious thing. You're practicing or noodling around and you find something you like, and it goes from there. Occasionally, as a kind of an exercise, I try to write a tune inspired by a composer I like.
Okay, yeah.
Without even like really listening to much of their stuff, too close to the writing, and then what comes out, maybe has the elements in that composer's writing that I like, but only I would probably know the connection.
Yeah.
But it's not foolproof, So yeah, and it's always like a by ear thing. It's never a system, But then I find that I tend to be able to like put what I write in categories. Like there's a few categories. Oh, it's one of these tunes, it's one of these tunes, one of these tunes. And so I'm also interested in maybe trying to break out of some of that. And I think maybe the way to do it is just to be a bit more patient sometimes, to just not like you find a solution, but maybe wait for a better solution or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's a good one. The listening. I mean, I sometimes do that. I need a tune, then I put on a Frizzell Motion Lovano trio, and I'm like, oh, okay. I'll write a rubato kind of hat. I got that. It's a good system actually. Yeah, just to.
Yeah.
But then I face this problem. I don't know if you have that as well. That I feel many times I feel like I have already written a tune like that. And then I start questioning myself whether that's good or not. So it's
man, yeah, me too, exactly. I mean, feeling that I've written a tune like that, and then also thinking I'm writing this tune, but like, are there a million other tunes that are kind of like this out there already?
Yeah.
Like, is there some way I can rethink it?
Yeah.
It's I mean, I guess that's like a centuries old problem.
Probably.
Yeah, but I definitely running into some of the same stuff.
I'm really curious if, like, let's say Paul Motion asked himself this question or not, or was he just like, yeah, here's another rubato hat, or or whoever of these guys, like.
Yeah, I wonder. That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, sometimes for people like that, I mean, I don't know what he thought about it, but because like I associate his playing so like his playing and his writing seem so inextricably linked that I don't know, maybe there's almost less to worry about if you're gonna play like that, you know?
Yeah.
Like, because it's just whatever he plays is gonna kind of sound like a full motion tune, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's true, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a good thing to aspire to.
Yeah, but you know, you said like you have a problem writing. I mean, problem. It's a process for your composing, but then I listen to your compositions, and it's like a web of things and intricate lines, and there's meters changing. Like lines are heavy, unisono. Like there must still be like when you start working on a tune, you invest a lot of time and thought, I guess, into it, where to go, or how do you develop a tune?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely more to it than I can see, but like it feels like it's kind of a slightly different process every time. So, oh, sorry, you froze there. Can you
Oh,
hear
no,
me?
yeah, I'm cool.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, occasionally it's like a clear musical idea, like I want to write something with quintuplets. So what am I going to write? Or sometimes maybe it's I'm just trying to think of the process for I guess sometimes that there are like very simple things like write a melody that's in fifths or something with large intervals. But then the reality of that with like meter changes and stuff, I mean, I'm trying not to force that.
Yeah,
Like if something is just, if it's 4 bars of 4/4, then that's what it is. But then if it's not, if it's some odd amount of bars or some mixed meter thing, to try to also just be like, okay, that's what's coming out naturally. So if I like the phrase, how that feels, that phrase feels, then I won't change that either, you know.
yeah.
Because I remember I used to, like years ago, I think like, this is too simple. I'll add a beat or leave out a beat and I know sometimes that's cool, but sometimes it feels kind of stilted or contrived. So I'm sort of trying to let things be what they are as well.
Yeah, no, it's well, I guess our generation, we've all done that. This
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
it's really interesting, like kind of going through these phases of really experimenting with odd meters and then free playing, and then again, like, you know, like it's funny. It's, I don't know, related to what we listened to, I guess, or something. I don't know.
oh man, definitely, I think so.
Yeah.
Because I think probably people that were in music school around the time that you and I were, that was when like everybody started to play in 7 and play in 5 and like, you know, listening to like Tim Burns records or Jim Black's records, or, you know, there was a lot of like odd meter stuff, and then going between freer playing and sort of complicated written material.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure we're all sort of influenced by some similar things.
Yeah, I love that always with Byrne and Jim actually also. Yeah, and the Alice No Access, man. That's like, whew, I think I know all the tunes on those records. Like, yeah, okay, that's the melody. That's like so funny. When you try to write something similar, you know, like with some fifths in the, and I think I love them. But you mentioned these two guys, and like, you know, you're from Ireland. What was the reason initially that you dug into jazz? Like, I guess mid-90s or late 90s, or maybe what was the moment that you know, like...
I remember, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, I remember just, I don't know what the first kind of impetus was, but I'd been, you know, playing guitar since I was like 7, I think, and there was an improvisation, like there was an ad in the summer for an improvisation course at this place, New Park Music Center, which it turned out also had a 2-year jazz diploma, but I didn't know anything about it. It was a summer course for a week for guitar players, and I went and did it, and the teacher's name was this guitar player, Mike Nielsen, and by pure coincidence, he had been in secondary school, like in high school, with my dad,
Oh,
and
wow.
he lived, you know, a mile down the road from where my parents lived. And because I have an unusual second name, he asked me who my dad was. So I did that course, and then he gave me a lift home, and then I discovered he taught, you know, also an improvisation course at another college. It was kind of more of a theory course, but sort of through that I started getting records and met a couple of other people around my age that were into it. Started playing like little gigs in cafes and stuff. But I guess that was the impetus, and it was also a time where there was Tower Records, which had a pretty big jazz section, and I'm semi-ashamed to admit that I often went in, would buy some CDs, copy them at home, bring them back in, and then
Oh, man.
exchange them for new ones. So it was also a way of like getting a lot of music, you know.
That's again our generational thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you could little listening station.
Yeah.
You could listen to them. Yeah. I remember I bought one record in Tower. I forget what it was, but I brought it back in to change it. And for the first time, the guy said, like, well, why are you changing it? And I said, I just don't like it. And he was like, what section did you buy it in? And I said, jazz. And he said, oh man, you got to be really careful in the jazz section. There's a lot of crap in there.
Oh, that's sad. Like, thanks, man. That's
but I still kept finding it.
But did you, was there like a jazz scene back then when you were digging into jazz? Like, I mean, you said you started doing little gigs, but I mean, I don't know much about Irish jazz scene. I mean, I know Ronan, you know, and Mike and some of the players, but was there like a gigging circuit, like, or like some gigs available? Or?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't. I mean, it wasn't a huge scene like in some cities, and to me, the scene. I mean, it was mostly Dublin. I mean, there were musicians, of course, in other places too, but mostly Dublin. It felt a little bit like, I mean, because it's an island, you know, on the edge of Europe, it felt a little bit separate from Europe and not as connected to London as you might think because of the geographical, you know, closeness. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely a scene. That generation of like Ronan and Mike and all those guys, there were a bunch of people, and there was, I mean, like quite a lot of musicians in my generation too. There were regular gigs in Dublin, and for a while when there was more arts funding, like at the height of the Celtic Tiger, there was you know, you could there was all these art centers around the country that you could tour. I mean, there was a moment where you could book like a decent tour around Ireland, and then that sort of gradually shrunk. Now it's quite a bit harder, but there are places, you know, starting to run more music again. You know, like between Dublin, Cork, Limerick, Belfast, like they'd be kind of the main ones. Galway, but then you know, there started being art centers in really small towns, you know, and you might not get a big audience, but you'd have a guaranteed fee. So there kind of was a touring circuit, and there were musicians, you know, a generation or two generations above me to kind of look up to. I mean, on guitar, like Louis Stewart, of course, was really big. So yeah, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't as big as some places, and it was maybe a little bit more split between, I mean, not now, between the sort of the more straight ahead thing and the, I don't know, you know, other stuff,
modern,
whatever that even, you know, but and now I think it's more connected, and that course in New Park has become a degree course in DCU, Dublin City University. And so there's lots of students from abroad coming, and I think it's a way to enter into the third year of the degree course in Berkeley. So so I think so now there's tons of young musicians in Dublin that I don't know, which is great. That's like, you know, an exciting prospect.
Yeah, like but you pursued then a PhD, I read, in music. Like, what's the story behind there?
Well, I did eventually. So I mean, I left Dublin when I was 19.
Oh, okay.
And now I'm 41, and I've really only been back for like 2 years in my mid-20s. So I went to The Hague and did an undergraduate and a master's, and then I moved to Iceland for a year.
Really?
Then
Oh,
back to Dublin for 2.5 years, and then moved to New York for 11 years. And it was during the time in New York that I did this PhD.
okay.
Even though it was with a university from Northern Ireland, Ulster University, and it was just there's a composer, Frank Lyons, who wrote a piece for me and a string quartet. And as we were working on the piece, it was right after I moved to New York. I was asking him about the PhD program because it seemed like there were some jazz musicians expressing interest in it, and it was also a practice-based program, so it wasn't only about the written stuff. And it just, it seemed like it would be a good fit, and it was, if you got it, it was funded, and I only had to be on campus like a handful of times each semester, so it kind of worked out great. But that was a good bit after having been in jazz school, you know.
Yeah. Okay.
So sort of weird to return to, and also that was very much focused on bass, and the previous stuff was all guitar. So
yeah. How did you decide for the bass? I mean, primarily, I got to know you as a bass player, to be honest. You know, I don't know. I think with Mikkel Plug you played, right? Also.
Yeah.
I think Mikkel, and that's how I did the Fresh Sound New Talent records as well, and then I saw you did that record. I checked you out, but like, how's the story there, guitar and bass? How did that begin?
I mean, it's always been like they've kind of always both been happening, but sometimes one's been more to the fore or the other. Like guitar was first, and I played like a little bit of electric bass in school. There was a gospel choir in my school against all the odds, and so there was like musicals and stuff, but guitar was very much the focus. And then towards the end of being in college, I started playing bass again, actually with Miguel playing drums. We were like a rhythm section and a piano trio. And I'm like, just because there's so many things about bass that I really like, that I don't know if it's true or not, but at the time it felt like you're being part of the rhythm section, you're closer to some of the rhythmic aspects of the music. It feels like a bridge a little bit between two parts of music. But it was just like a fun thing. It wasn't a thing I even really practiced, but then the more I did it, the more I realized all the things that I couldn't do, and started to practice it, where it sort of became this 50-50 thing. Then there was a moment where it was like 4-string bass, baritone guitar detuned, like so it was down a fifth instead of a fourth, and guitar. And then someone said, if you played 6-string electric bass, you'd sort of cover elements of both. So then that became a big thing for me. And then so for the majority of my time in New York, that was my main instrument. And then it was maybe the last, even though I was teaching guitar and writing on guitar and would sometimes do gigs, like there was a bunch of bands I played in on guitar, but they were very project based. They weren't necessarily a daily occurrence like the bass was, but going from 6-string electric bass to guitar isn't that huge a jump, But then the last bunch of years in New York, I kind of really wanted to make them be sort of even, so I pushed the guitar thing a lot. And now since I've moved here, it's continued to be pretty even. But it's also just been a battle of maybe I should just pick one, and then I pick one, and then you're called for something, you can't say no, and so it's like
you as a guitar player, like who are your? I mean, when I listen to your playing, it's, I don't know, I hear like Ducray or Alan Holdsworth, or I don't know, even like Schofield, or the Angular Lines or something like that. But who were like the guitarists that kind of influenced you, that you checked them out?
I mean, I guess it's funny between guitar and bass, because it feels like there are not that many improvising electric bass players in the kinds of music we're talking about. But there's so many guitar players. So like, I mean, definitely the ones you mentioned there have been like really big kind of obsessions at different times. I mean, it's probably all the obvious ones, before that. Frizzell, Matheny, Abercrombie, Wes Montgomery, Jim Hall, Derek Bailey. Oh God, a million people now that
I know.
I'm blanking on. You know, all the obvious ones. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the same people you probably
Yeah,
listen
it's
to.
like listening to myself now, actually.
Yeah.
That's terrible. No, it's
Yeah, it's funny. There's and because now I don't know. I'm not listening to. I think now. I mean, there's a lot of guitar players of our generation now that I like a lot.
yeah,
If I listen to, I mean, I try not to listen to too much guitar, but if I do, I kind of sometimes dip in and see what they're doing. Like there's this great guitar player from DC called Anthony Pirog. I'm not sure if I'm saying his
yeah,
name correctly.
yeah, yeah.
You know him?
Yeah.
He's amazing. I love his playing. And there's a ton of other like Keisuke Matsuno.
Yeah, he's in Berlin, right? No? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Um, yeah, there's tons like Jonathan Goldberger and
yeah.
Ryan
I
Ferrer.
love him. Yeah,
Um, so there's also a ton of people now like around my age that I guess are influences too.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking of these guys, who are like Ryan, I know, and Jonathan, they're in New York based, and many other guys, of course. Like, what was the main trigger for you to move to New York? I mean, it's kind of an obvious choice, of course, for a jazz musician to go there for a certain time, but what was the main trigger for you?
The main, I mean, it was just there was so much music that I was listening to, that I loved in college, and it was kind of all from there, like music that was happening, then. So like tons of Fresh Sound stuff. That was a lot of it was on Fresh Sound, but then almost all of like heroes or musicians of older generations that I listened to, I discovered had also lived there or were connected to there.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, I mean, I just wanted to visit and see what that would feel like, and I went, and loved it, because people had sort of told me, oh, it's going to be cutthroat and all that kind of stuff. And then I got there and I was like, people are great. This is lovely. Like I really like the whole thing. Feels great. And honestly, being from Ireland, like going to New York felt very easy culturally. I found it harder to assimilate in The Hague, like being in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
I felt a bit like a barbarian or something. And then going to New York was fine. So I kind of wanted to do it, but of course it's difficult financially and with visas and all that stuff. So I took a lesson with Drew Ress when I was there.
Really? Oh wow.
And I don't really know Drew at all. We just sort of had that lesson, and I'm sure he doesn't remember it, but it was really helpful. Where we were talking about finding your own voice and all that kind of stuff. And I was telling him I wanted to move to New York, and he said, if you're somebody who can kind of be in an intense environment and isolate, then you should do it. But if you're not, if you think you're going to be overwhelmed, then you could also be in a smaller scene for a while, have more time to find something, and then move. And so moving to Iceland and then back to Dublin were really helpful for that.
Yeah, transition.
I was like 28 when I moved to New York. And so I was 28 when I moved, but I kind of wanted it from when I was probably 22 or something. So it had been a lot of years of thinking about it, and kind of a long build.
Who were the first guys you hooked up with? I mean, in New York, that you start? Did you, immediately start playing gigs, or how was that introduction in the scene going on?
The thing, well, when I was visiting, I played a handful of gigs, but there were people that I had also started to play with in Europe before I moved there. So like, I knew Loren Stillman. He's maybe the person that I've known longest through New York. But Loren Stillman was one. Pete Robbins was another.
Yeah.
At the time, who else was I playing with? I played with Near Felder a bit. And Ivan Opsvik.
Oh yeah, really, yeah.
Trying to remember just in that period, and then right after I moved, like I met Tommy Crane, and so there were people that I met there quite quickly, and most of them were through people that either I'd met on previous visits or I'd been playing with in Europe.
Yeah.
So kind of getting into the scene felt kind of natural. And then gigs started to happen quickly because there were just lots of small places around town to play,
Yeah.
And at the time, at least, they weren't necessarily booking, 6 months ahead. I mean, it was, it might just be a few weeks or something, or you get called last minute to sub, or somebody would say there's a triple bill. Do you want to do something? And it was like the New York bandleader thing of you have to guarantee people a fee. So
Yeah.
it was also like, if you're going to take the gig, you're probably going to lose money. So can you do that as a leader? So trying to balance that leader thing, the Simon thing. But yeah, the whole kind of introduction to that felt kind of natural and as easy as living in somewhere like New York can be.
Can be. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Like you becoming a band leader, I mentioned before Fresh Sound, and you did as well, like, listening to all these guys. And how did like this Trot the Mouse story begin for you? And I mean, I love the music there on that one. It's really such cool tunes that you wrote. And but like, how did the band form up? And I mean, it's European players, and like you said, you started making these connections, and Loren is on it. And but what's the story there? Like you becoming a band leader and.
Yeah, well, I mean, so there's two Trot and Mouse records. There's there's the one on Fresh Sound,
and the later one with Rainey, and yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
The first one, I mean, just I had played a lot with Sean Carpio, the drummer on that, and Joachim Badehorst, and we had a trio for a long time called Red Rocket that I usually played guitar in, but occasionally bass. And so I'd been playing, I forget the exact how, I mean, I knew Chris a little bit and I knew Loren better at the time, so I was going to record with them when I was there. And then it turned out that Sean and Joachim were going to be in town anyway. And so, I mean, yeah, in retrospect, it was a risk because we hadn't played gigs, and I wrote all these 3-part horn arrangements, and I kind of hadn't done that before. Remember, just writing it out on staff paper and playing it on the guitar and thinking, sounds good on guitar. I'm sure it'll be fine with the horns. Jesus, there's no guarantee of that. But it just, everybody got on great socially, and it felt it just felt like a natural fit. And then we did some gigs. They came to Ireland, but
oh really?
But without Chris. So it was Loren, Joachim, Sean, and I. We did that a few times, and then that was still while I was like switching between baritone guitar and 4-string bass.
Yeah.
So, and I think Sean and Joachim might have known Loren and Chris a little bit as well, separate to me. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, it's a really nice help. I mean, it's like you mentioned the other one also. That's a completely different story. It's obviously the musicians. How did then the second one happen? Like, because you went kind of a different path almost.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean, for that sort of period, I was calling any band where I was playing bass and there was 2 horns and no real chord instruments. I was using Trot and Mouse as a thing. And Trot and Mouse is a I thought it was a very common phrase in Ireland, but I think it's just from where my grandmother's from. It's if you leave a tea bag in a cup of tea for too long, people say you could trot a mouse across that tea because it's so thick. So the second one with Matt and Ingrid and Tom was, I mean, it was a similar thing. We played some sessions and we had done some gigs in New York, and there was so much music coming out of the kind of scene that I associate them with, like loosely speaking. And the music is very different, but honestly, the approach is kind of very similar. The approach is similar. Just the results kind of sound different. But to play the two of them, I mean, I guess the second one is maybe a little more open.
Yeah.
But and at the time, or no, how is that? No, sorry, that's not at the time. But then that second one came out on Skirl, on Chris's label.
Yeah, and Chris's. Yeah.
I guess that was a connection to it, that he was on the first one, but the second one was on his label. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
But I think, oh no, sorry, go ahead.
No, just I love how, I love Tom, and he's amazing on that. I mean, he's amazing on every record, but
yeah,
such a beautiful connection you had there, like really nice.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably the end of the Trot and Mouse kind of thing. I felt like I had to come up with some new words. That's why it's Obsany now.
Yeah, I love this latest one, the Berlin band. It's amazing. It's a different story a little bit. So
yeah, they're all sort of pretty different, I guess. Yeah,
which is good. I mean, in a way, it's you, of course, but still, it's like, yeah, okay, I'll go there, and which is fantastic. It's
just sort of different interests, and then I guess leading from the bass or from the guitar also feels pretty different.
Yeah.
So that definitely affects it with the Obsany stuff as well.
Yeah, it's you're now in Berlin. Like, what made you then decide to leave New York? Like, what was? I mean, Berlin is of course now one of the blooming jazz cities in Europe, let's say, but with a huge scene. But what was the main idea going back to Europe?
There was, it was a complicated one. I mean, it seemed like some things might just be a little bit more straightforward, like touring. I felt would probably be easier. Being in Europe, you can travel by train. You can say yes to things that probably wouldn't be financially viable from New York, and the cost of living is much less. And also, my wife is from New York and had lived there for a full 39 years, so she was also into checking something else out. So I kind of thought all that, and then I'll be a little bit closer to Ireland, and I'll still go back to New York at least twice a year, and stay connected to the people that I've been playing with, the friends, and still sort of be part of it that way. So it's kind of been nice to go back and not have to worry about making a living there. Just engage in the parts of New York that I love. I guess that's sort of the short version of why it felt like it would make sense to move. Also, it's just so expensive. I was like, I think it's only going to keep getting more expensive, and I don't think my earnings are going to increase at the same rate of, the way things are going in New York. So, also, if I'm going to make that move, maybe it's nice to make it now while I have, or feel that I have kind of the energy to do that, rather than in, I don't know, 10 or 15 or 20 years.
What was it an easy transition for you? I mean, like coming to Berlin. I mean, Jim was in Berlin, or is it in Berlin, of course, Black and some other players, but like, how did that go? The transition to Berlin?
The transition was fine. I mean, it was weird because it was the height of COVID.
Oh shit! Yeah, exactly.
It was kind of a weird moment. I mean, we had decided pre-COVID to do it, but so like the practicalities of just getting here were quite complicated, because we spent 2 months in Ireland, because Cara, my wife, wouldn't have been allowed into Germany as an American. We'd been allowed into Ireland, married to an Irish person, and then we drove in a camper van. My brother drove us from Ireland to Berlin with all our stuff and 2 cats.
Oh wow! Shit.
That was like kind of an intense little period, but like socially and musically getting into stuff here has been lovely. Like, similar to New York, people are nice and open, and there's tons of great musicians. So it's been, and I knew that I knew people before I got here, but then arriving here, I realized, I know more people than I thought I did even. And similar to New York, there's always people passing through. And even people living in cities, not that close. The train travel thing really makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it's great.
And just like with traveling with an instrument, like that's really a huge thing for me, at least, to take a lot of that stress off the table, to be able to just get on the train and not have to worry about booking an extra seat or battling it out with gate agents. So yeah, so overall the transition has been lovely. And Jim, actually, who you mentioned, was really helpful because we live in the apartment above him, and
Oh,
he
really?
helped us.
Oh, that's so cool, man.
Yeah. And so that was nice in lockdown as well. We were in this building, and also I don't know if you know Nick Dunstan and
Yeah.
Jansu Rukulu. They were also in the building, so we had like a lovely kind of
Oh, that's fun.
musician bubble in the building, which was nice.
Say hi to Jim. So
I will.
yeah, being in Europe now, and you said it's easier to travel. Like, how are your experience being a band leader here and booking? And did you like travel around already with your band? And like, how do you find that experience compared to, let's say, New York or?
I mean, to be honest, I haven't done a lot of stuff as a band leader here yet.
Okay.
I'm really, hoping to do lots of stuff with Obsany. But the like vast majority of what I've done here has been as a sideman.
Oh, okay.
And then some co-led things, but mostly as a sideman. So I've been starting to kind of dip my toes in the band leader waters here. I mean, to be honest, it hasn't been super easy booking that band. I think getting someone to help with booking would be great. But I think, if there's a record, I think that'll probably help. And so we're going to do a gig in Berlin in February, right before we record, and then we have another gig booked like December 2023 in Munich. But there's, so the band leader thing, I haven't done a huge amount of it since we've moved, but I'm definitely trying to start to prioritize that.
Yeah.
But being a sideman is so nice, you just show up and play the music.
Who did you play? Who did you hook up with? I mean, I know you played with Jim a little after Berlin, but like, who are some of the players that kind of you started to play with as a sideman?
I mean, some of the sideman stuff that I've been doing has been New York bands, like subbing. Like I just did a tour with Aaron Park's band.
Really? Oh wow!
Where I was subbing, and that was really fun with Tommy Crane and Greg Toohey.
Wow, man! Okay.
Yeah, that was it was great. And then I also subbed on guitar in Chris Morrissey's band. Chris Morrissey's bass player and singer-songwriter. So they were kind of, New York things. But then there's a great drummer here, Lucas Akintaya, who has a quartet with Keisuke Matsuno and Jeremy Viner, who comes over from New York for it.
Oh wow!
And there's sort of ongoing different projects with Charlotte Grev, the alto player. Like there's been her project Sediments We Move with this choir Cantus Domus from here. There's been some stuff with Michael Attias now that he's here.
Oh yeah.
There is and then there are also things that are more collaborative, like some stuff with Miles Perkin. And there's been a lot of things. I feel like I'm leaving all sorts of stuff out, but like the sort of classic thing of lots of bands that work intermittently, sort of weaving in and out of each other.
Yeah.
So, and there's so many great musicians based in Berlin now that it's been really nice. Jansu has a new band with me and Nick Dunstan and Lucas Koenig, this great drummer from Austria.
Yeah, I love this guy. Yeah, I love this guy. Yeah.
He's great.
He's amazing.
And there's an Irish tenor player who lives in Cologne. I don't know if you know Matthew Halpin.
No, I don't think so.
Oh man, he's amazing. He's a great tenor player. So some stuff with him. There's also an Irish band. It's kind of the only band of all Irish people that I play in called Romer. So there's been, our record just came out, but we haven't been doing gigs, but I'm hoping to get more stuff happening with that. I guess they're all in the collaborative band thing rather than sideman thing, but so it's been a mixture, lots of different stuff.
Yeah. Did the scene in Berlin suffer for COVID, or like did it recover really fast? Like,
oh, that's a good question. I mean, like when I'd been here before COVID, they were always short visits, so it's hard to sort of compare.
Yeah.
I wonder how people that have been here for longer than me feel about it. I mean, I think for a long time there was so little happening, but now it feels very active to me now. There's music all the time, and
Yeah.
I don't think any clubs that I know of closed permanently through COVID. I think that's true. So it feels to me like it's recovered. I mean, who knows what the winter holds, but it feels like I
Okay.
imagine it felt pre-COVID, you know?
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool.
Nice.
So otherwise, like you mentioned, like going to the studio in February and the new record hopefully coming out. Like otherwise, what are the plans for the upcoming months and weeks? Beside that you have to struggle with composing, of course. So.
Yeah. Aside from that, well, there's going to be. It's funny. I've been traveling a lot the last few months, but now the next couple of months I'll be mostly in Berlin, which is nice. So Lucas Akintaya, that drummer that I mentioned, we're gonna do a new record with his band. And I think maybe that'll be produced by Pictorial. And then Jansu's band, we're doing some gigs. And there's some gigs with a new band of Michael Atias's. I'm also gonna play the choir that recorded Charlotte's piece Sediments We Move. They're playing performing this Schnittke Requiem, and there's an electric bass part. So
okay.
Bass for that, which will be exciting and a bit terrifying, you know, working with the choral conductor of no rhythm section. So there's a bunch of stuff. There's a great young pianist composer here, Julius Windisch, who has a 2-guitar band, and we put out an EP a little while ago. So there's some stuff with him. It's that kind of, you know, mesh of things coming together.
Super busy, actually.
And then some touring next year with you know, a bunch of stuff sort of spread out throughout the winter and the spring.
Yeah, fantastic, man. Wow, yeah, right. Man, I'll leave you be. Thanks for sharing some of these thoughts. So, you know.
Yeah, man, thanks for getting in touch. Lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. And